Recently, I started thinking about future mechanics we could see in War Thunder, one of which is ECM, or electronic countermeasures. I think this could be an interesting addition to the game, as it would significantly change the way the game is played and the meta is in RRB and Sim. I'll be going over a bunch of different things, like how it would work in War Thunder, as well as what planes we have that could get it. This is a topic that is pretty complicated, and you'd have to take multiple advanced physics courses to fully understand the specifics of how it works, so I'll attempt to explain everything as well as I can. However, I also think that in terms of War Thunder, everything will be very simple for the player, and I'll explain how I think that could work as well. I'll say it might not do what you think it will, especially against SAM systems and ground battles. Also, before we get started, if you would like to join my Discord, I have a link in the description. If you enjoy the video as well, please make sure to subscribe, as I'm starting to close in on 2,000 subscribers. Starting off, ECM is a very complicated topic, as I already mentioned. Jamming enemy radars may not work exactly like you think. ECM doesn't just make you disappear off the enemy's radar, rather it feeds false information to the enemy radar. Essentially, it can spoof your position, range, and speed. This will prevent the enemy from getting accurate targeting information on you, therefore they won't be able to give their missiles proper guidance. This means it would be much easier to avoid missiles since they may not even be able to find you in the first place. However, this is where things start to differ a bit between NATO and Russian ECM systems. Russian ECM pods, like the ones that go on the wingtips of flankers and the Su-34, are much more powerful than most NATO jammers. The jammers carried by Russian planes also have the capability to jam missiles, while NATO jammers, like the ECM pods on an F-16 or an F-15, are not able to do so. So let's say an AMRAAM was to be fired at you in an Su-27 SM, and it was able to find you after jamming the enemy plane's radar. In this case, your ECM pods would also be able to jam the incoming AMRAAM, and doing this in addition to notching would mean that the missile would not be able to target you properly or at all. Just the ECM pods by themselves would make it significantly harder for the AMRAAM to target you properly in the first place. But let's switch the scenario and say you're in an F-16C with your ECM pod. It would be able to jam or spoof the enemy radar like I said before. So like the Russian ECM pods, it would make it hard for the enemy missile to find you in the first place since the enemy's radar doesn't have accurate information on you. But let's say again the missile was able to find you. In this scenario with the ECM pod on the F-16C, it is not able to properly jam the missiles just because of the way they're designed and what they're built for. So you would still have to notch and chaff just like normal to evade it. This would give the Russian ECM pods a significant advantage in game, but they would still both be very useful. Now, I want to talk a bit about how ECM could work in ground battles and how it would affect SAM systems that are currently in the game. At top tier, where most electronic countermeasures will be used, there are not any SAM or SPAA systems that only rely on the radar for targeting. There are some like the ADATs that only have radar for detection, so it will be harder to find planes with ECM, but it uses optical tracking, so it won't have any issues tracking and targeting the enemy. While ECM absolutely will limit the capabilities of some anti-air systems at higher tiers, it won't stop them entirely. Gaijin has also been talking about potentially adding multi-vehicle anti-air systems like the Patriot and S-300 just as examples. These may run into a bit more issues with ECM seeing as though they solely rely on radar. Though these larger systems would be more resistant to ECM in the first place, it would be a more fair fight if you had an ECM pod to fight against these systems. But if ECM were to be added in the next update without them, there wouldn't be too many issues for people playing SPAA or SAM vehicles in the game. Obviously, this is a massive simplification of how ECM works, but unfortunately, I'm not a physics professor, so I'm not exactly the best person to explain it. But essentially, across all the different ECM pods, they all do roughly the same thing. The ECM pods receive the electromagnetic waves from the enemy radars, and they are pretty much immediately able to turn around and emit their own signal mimicking the enemy radar. This emission is to trick the radar into being wrong about a few different things. For the most part, it can trick it into thinking you're not in the position you are, since radars use the return off of an aircraft to determine your position and speed in space relative to itself. You will also typically appear larger than you actually are on their radar, but this isn't an issue since they also can't pinpoint your exact location. Therefore, they can't guide their missiles to you properly in the first place. For more advanced ECM, like what is built into the F-35, it's able to pretty much perfectly mimic anything it would like, for example, just a Boeing 777. I also want to talk about how I could see it being implemented. Obviously, you would have to equip the ECM pods, and I wouldn't be surprised if it would be yet another module you have to research. For some planes like the Su-27 family, you'll lose two R-73s to put on the ECM pods on the wingtip pylons. But on other planes like the F-16C, the pod goes on a pylon not taken up by missiles. In the case of the F-16C, it would go on the pylon on the fuselage opposite from the targeting pod. The way I see it, we will likely have very little control outside of turning the ECM pods on and off. For the most part, with current missiles, you will want to keep the ECM on all the time since it is designed to defend you against the enemy. My opinion on this could change in the future if we start to see missiles that are able to target ECM missions, but I don't think we will see that for a while. We would eventually start to see better missiles that have ECCM in the future, like the M120C. Even subvariants of the M120C had better ECCM than others, and ultimately the M120D and its variants had even better ECCM. This would also apply to other future missiles that we would get, like later variants of the R-77, the Mica NG, and other entirely new missiles. In the future, there would also be planes like the F-35 that have very good ECM built in. But going back to its implementation, there really isn't any need for you to be able to control it more than turning it on and off, since it mostly just does what it needs to by itself anyways, even in real life. It would just be something you turn on at the beginning of the match and forget about. Plus, it would just be another thing to mess with since there are already so many things to pay attention to at top tier. Ultimately, I see very few reasons to turn it off at all during a match, unless we get to a point where there are weapons that can target you off of that signal. The only thing I can maybe think of would be if you're playing in Sim and are trying to sneak around the map to strike ground targets. But until it's actually added, I can't totally make up my mind. I'd have to see how they do it, which obviously would be fairly realistic, but still. There are also a few different ECM pods in the files, at least parts of them. The physical models for the ECM pods for the Su-27 and Su-34 were found at least. Obviously this doesn't mean much, but I could see ECM being added sometime this year. It's really one of those things I could see being added at any time, but I could also see them adding ECM at the same time that they add anti-radiation missiles like the Shrike to the game. It would also be interesting to see planes like the EA-6 and the EA-18G Growler, which are dedicated electronic warfare planes. Obviously, these planes would also carry anti-radiation weapons, so there would be a good use for them. I doubt we will see a use for aircraft that only have ECM capabilities just based on how War Thunder works. I don't want to sit here and read a list of all the planes that could get ECM, but there are a fair amount. Pretty much every plane at top tier currently would be able to receive ECM pods. The F-15E, F-15C, F-16C, A-10C, and the F-111, among others for the US, can receive ECM pods. Lots of other planes like the Su-27, Su-25, SM-3, J-10, J-11, Tornado, the Eurofighters, and the Rafale can all receive their own ECM pods as well. I feel like it will be interesting to see how it may be able to help out some strike aircraft like the A-10. While it won't be able to completely stop any anti-air in ground battles, it might just be enough to make the A-10C actually decent at CAS. The last thing I want to talk about is just how much I think the meta will change initially. With active radar missiles becoming significantly less powerful overnight, I feel like we may start to see players carry more IR missiles again. Obviously, ARH missile kills will still happen, but their capabilities will be reduced significantly. We may start to see a whole new meta in the middle of the current ARH meta and the old IRCCM IR missile meta. It will probably start to creep back to an ARH meta later on as we get better planes and missiles, but we'll just have to wait and see. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please remember to like and subscribe. As always, please let me know what you think in the comments below.